The house in Asheville was too quiet in a way Nora Vance had stopped trying to fix. She had lived alone in it for 5 years since Thomas died. And in the beginning, the quiet had felt like an accusation, a judgment passed by every empty room on a woman who had spent 32 years filling spaces with other people's needs and had no idea what to do now that no one needed anything from her anymore. She had tried music talk radio, the television left on in the kitchen, while she graded papers in the study. None of it worked the way noise is supposed to work. It sat on the surface of the silence without reaching whatever was underneath. She was 58 years old, and she taught 9th grade English at Crestview High, and she was good at it, genuinely good, the kind of teacher who gets cards at Christmas from students who graduated 7 years ago. But the school year had ended in June, and September had not yet begun, and the long summer stretched around her like a landscape she did not know how to cross. She was sitting on the back porch with her morning coffee on the 3rd Tuesday of August when the mail carrier left a certified envelope propped against the front door. Nora almost didn't get up for it. She had learned to distrust official envelopes, the kind that required her signature, the kind that arrived bearing bad news in formal language, designed to keep you at a slight remove from the weight of what they were saying. But something about the return address made her set down her coffee and cross through the house in her bare feet. Harlan County Probate Office, Harlan County, Tennessee. She stood in the front hallway and looked at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. The letter informed Nora Jean Vance, née Nora Jean Crawford, that the estate of May Ellen Crawford, deceased April 3rd, 2022, had been held in administrative review due to a title dispute with an adjacent parcel now resolved. As the sole living heir, Nora was entitled to the property, a parcel of land in the Appalachian foothills of Harlan County, Tennessee. She would need to appear or send a representative within 60 days. May had been dead for 2 years and 4 months. Nora sat down on the bottom step of the staircase because her legs made the decision before she did. She had known about May's death. A woman from down the mountain road had called her in the spring of 2022, gentle and careful on the phone, the way people are when they are carrying something heavy and doing their best not to drop it. Nora had thanked her and hung up and sat in the kitchen for 2 hours without moving. She had not gone back to Harlan County for the burial. She had told herself it was the distance the semester was ending. Her students were in the middle of their finals and needed her. Those things were true. They were also the particular kind of true that a smart woman uses to avoid looking directly at the thing she cannot face. She had left that mountain at 20, and she had not gone back in 38 years. She and May had spoken on the phone infrequently and carefully in the way of two people who love each other, but have arranged the terms of the relationship around a distance that neither of them ever fully explained. May had not asked her to come home. Nora had not offered. They had conducted their love through phone calls and occasional letters and the annual Christmas package May sent with preserves and a note written in her particular cramped hand, always pressing too hard on the pen, as though she didn't trust the page to hold the words unless she forced them in. The last package had arrived Christmas 2021. 3 months later, May was gone. Nora read the letter a second time. She read it a third time. Then she put it on the kitchen counter and stood looking at it the way you look at something that has changed the shape of a day you thought you knew. She was still standing there when the knock came. Soft 2 knocks, the knock of someone who has been standing outside for a moment, working up the nerve. Nora opened the front door. The boy was small for 13, narrow in the way of children who have grown quickly in height and not yet filled in around the edges. He had dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that were her son. Daniel's eyes, gray-green and watchful. And seeing them in this child's face hit Nora somewhere between the sternum and the throat in a way she was not immediately able to manage. He had a backpack over both shoulders, olive green, the kind sold in army surplus stores. He was holding a piece of paper. "Are you Nora Vance?" he said. "I mean Crawford. Nora Crawford." "I'm both," Nora said. "Who are you?" "My name is Eli." He held out the paper. It was a handwritten note, the handwriting young and careful, the writing of a boy who had learned to form his letters properly and took the responsibility seriously. "My dad was Daniel Crawford. He died 6 weeks ago. Heart. He was 41. A pause, small and enormous at the same time. He didn't have anyone else to put down. His emergency contact was you. I found your address in his papers." Nora looked at the note. She looked at the boy. Her son Daniel had cut contact 11 years ago. She had not fought it the way she should have. She had told herself he needed space, needed room to become whoever he was going to be, without her particular version of motherhood pressing on him. And then the space had become years, and the years had become a silence so established it had started to feel like a fact of the world rather than a choice either of them had made. She had not known about Eli. She stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "Please come in." He came in and stood in the front hallway and looked around with the careful attention of a child who has learned to read spaces quickly to assess whether a place is safe, whether the person in it is someone he can trust. Nora recognized the assessment because she had spent 30 years watching children perform it in her classroom doorways, that particular moment of calculation that children who have had uncertain lives develop like a second sense. She brought him to the kitchen. She made him a sandwich because it was past noon and he had the look of a boy who had been traveling since morning. She poured herself more coffee and sat across from him and watched him eat with the focused economy of someone who has learned not to take food for granted. "How did you get here?" she asked. "Bus from Knoxville. I've been staying with the neighbor since Dad died, but she's moving to Florida. She helped me buy the ticket." He looked at her steadily. "I know this is a lot. I know you don't know me, but I didn't have anywhere else." "You don't have to explain yourself," Nora said. "You did the right thing." She meant it. Even in the shock of the moment, sitting across from the grandson she had not known existed, she meant it completely. She picked up the letter from the Harlan County Probate office, still on the counter where she had left it. She set it on the table between them. "I received something this morning," she said, "about land my mother left me, up in the mountains in eastern Tennessee." She watched his face. "I haven't been there since before you were born. Since before your father was born, almost." She paused. "I was thinking I should go. I need to go, actually. There are legal things that require it." She folded her hands around her coffee cup. "I think you should come with me." Eli looked at the letter, then at her. "You just met me," he said. "I know. Why do you want me to come?" Nora thought about how to answer this honestly. "Because you showed up on my doorstep with your father's eyes and your father's nose, and I just found out this morning I'm going back to the place I grew up, which I haven't done in 38 years, and I think the world is telling me something, and I'm old enough to know that when the world tells you something, you had better pay attention." Eli considered this with the seriousness of a boy who had been making adult-sized decisions for the last 6 weeks. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. They left the next morning. The drive from Asheville to Harlan County was 4 hours through a landscape that changed gradually, and then, all at once, the way eastern Tennessee always changed when you turned toward the mountains, the land lifting and folding, the trees closing in on either side of the road until the highway became a 2-lane, and the 2-lane became a county road, and the county road became the kind of path that existed because people had needed to get somewhere and had eventually worn the earth into agreement. Eli sat in the passenger seat and watched the landscape out the window with the focused attention Nora was already coming to recognize as his default mode. He asked questions about what they passed, the names of rivers, the geological age of the ridges, whether the dark band in the cliff face visible from the road was coal. "How do you know to ask about that?" Nora said. "Dad was interested in geology," Eli said. "He used to take me to outcrops on weekends and explain the layers. He was good at explaining things." A pause. "He was better at explaining rocks than at explaining people, I think." Nora kept her eyes on the road. "He gets that honestly," she said quietly. Eli glanced at her. "From you or from her, your mom?" "Both, probably," Nora said. "The Crawford women have always been better with the natural world than the human one." Eli seemed to find this satisfying rather than troubling, which told her something about the kind of boy he was. She told him about May on the drive. She told him the things worth telling, the things that had survived 38 years of distance intact, which were more than she had expected when she began. May had been a woman of the mountain, in the way that some people are entirely of a place, not merely living somewhere, but constituted by it, shaped by its particular air and light, and the knowledge of what was under the surface. She had kept a large garden and preserved everything from it. She had made her own decisions and defended them without apology. She had believed the mountain held more truth than the people on it gave it credit for, and she had spent her life trying to learn what it knew. She sounds like someone I'd like, Eli said. She would have liked you, Nora said, and felt the truth of it land in her chest with the particular ache of things that arrived too late. The road ended at a gravel turnout in the late afternoon. The last mile they walked down the mountain road that Nora had walked in the other direction at 20 years old, with her whole life packed into 2 bags and the certain conviction that she was heading towards something better than what she was leaving behind. The conviction had not been entirely wrong. She had had a life, a good marriage for most of its length, a career she was proud of, a son she had not managed to hold. But walking down this road now with the October air sharp and honest in her lungs and the old trees on either side showing their autumn colors, with the unhurried confidence of things that have done this many times before, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Like she had made a wrong turn 38 years ago and was only now finding her way back to where the road split. The house appeared through the trees. Nora stopped walking. It was not what she had expected, which was not to say it was better or worse, only that it was more real than the image she had carried. The roof had failed on one side. The porch had collapsed into lumber and weeds. Windows were missing. The whole structure wore the expression of something that had been waiting a long time without complaint, patient in the way of things built to last, holding its shape against everything the years had arranged against it. Eli stopped beside her. Is that it? That's it. It's still standing. It is, Nora said. There was something in her voice she didn't entirely control. They crossed the yard, and she pushed open the front door, and the smell came out first pine and earth, and the ghost of the wood smoke of 10,000 fires. And beneath that, something else, something she had no name for, except that it smelled like her mother's hands, and like the particular quality of winter mornings in this kitchen when she was very young and the world was small enough to be safe. The rocking chair was still there. May's rocking chair, the one that had sat in the same corner for as long as Nora could remember, the one May had rocked in every evening of Nora's childhood. Nora walked to it and put her hand on the back of it and stood there for a moment with her eyes closed. There's something in this drawer, Eli said from the kitchen. Nora took her hand off the chair and went to the kitchen. Eli held a folded piece of paper yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was visible through the folds, and Nora recognized it before she touched it. Too hard on the pen. She took it and read it. If you're reading this, you found your way back. Good. The mountain's been waiting for you. Nora stood in the kitchen of her mother's house and read these words and felt them land in a place that had been waiting for exactly this wait, the way a door that has stood open too long finally receives something worth closing around. What does it say? Eli asked. She read it to him. He was quiet for a moment. She wrote it for you specifically. She wrote it for whoever came back, Nora said, but she hoped it would be me. How do you know? Nora folded the paper and put it in the pocket of her jacket close against her chest. "Because I know her handwriting," she said. "And there's a difference between writing for anyone and writing for someone." She was writing for someone. They gathered wood and made a fire in the old cast-iron stove, which accepted it with the willingness of something that has been waiting for exactly this use. Warmth seeped into the room from the corners inward. Eli sat on the floor near the stove, his back against the wall, his long legs folded, watching the fire with the focused calm of a boy who had been living with crisis long enough to recognize the texture of a moment that was not one. Nora sat in May's rocking chair and let the mountain dark press against the broken windows and thought about 38 years. The sound came when the dark was complete. Eli heard it first, or noticed it first, his head lifting the way an animal's head lifts when something in the environment shifts. "Something's outside," he said. Nora was at the window in 3 steps. In the yard, moving through the moonlight with the slow, deliberate grace of great age, was a horse, chestnut, or what had been chestnut, now silver dappled with the streak of white down the muzzle that Nora had last seen when she was 20 years old and leaving this mountain for what she had believed was forever. She had stood at the fence and looked at this horse, a young animal then, and she had not said goodbye to him because she had told herself she was not sentimental, and because saying goodbye to a horse would have made the leaving real in a way she was not ready for. "That's Jasper," she said, and her voice had done something she hadn't given it permission to do. "Who's Jasper?" "My mother's horse." She was already moving toward the door. "He should be dead. He should have been gone years ago. He was already old when—" She stopped. She opened the door and stepped out into the cold. Jasper stood in the yard and watched her come toward him. He was an old animal now, the age visible in the way he held himself careful and considered each movement the product of long deliberation. But his eyes were clear. His ears came forward when she raised her hands in the old gesture, the gesture May had taught her before she was tall enough to reach his face without standing on a fence rail. She stopped an arm's length away and waited. Jasper stepped forward and lowered his head and pressed his muzzle into her open hands and breathed out long and warm and slow, the breath of an animal releasing something it has been holding. Eli stood in the doorway behind her. "He knows you," the boy said softly. "He knows the family," Nora said. But she felt the warmth of his breath in her palms and thought about her mother feeding this horse for 2 decades, and she was not entirely sure the distinction was meaningful. Jasper shifted. His nose moved against the front pocket of her jacket, insistent and specific searching. Nora reached in and found the folded note. She pulled it out. Jasper pressed his muzzle against it briefly, deliberately, then drew back and looked at her. She turned the paper over. On the back, in the same hand, pressed harder into the paper than the front, the words of someone writing in urgency or in the dark. If Jasper is still alive, follow him. He remembers what I couldn't tell you. Don't wait for morning. Nora read it once. Read it again. The forest pressed against the edges of the yard, dark and full of whatever it had been holding. Eli had come out and was standing beside her, reading over her shoulder. He was 13 years old and had just lost his father and had traveled alone to the doorstep of a grandmother he had never met. And he was standing in the cold in an unfamiliar mountain yard, looking at a note from a dead woman, telling them to follow an old horse into the dark. "Are we doing this?" he said. Nora looked at her mother's handwriting, pressed hard enough into the paper to last. She thought about 38 years of not coming back. She thought about the things she had told herself to make the not coming back feel reasonable, and how reasonable they had seemed at the time, and how much less reasonable they seemed standing here. "Get your jacket," she said, "and the flashlight from the bag." Eli went inside. Jasper waited at the edge of the yard, his ears forward, his patience absolute. Eli came back out. He stood beside her and did not take her hand because he was 13 and they had only known each other for 24 hours, and 13-year-old boys do not take their grandmother's hand. But he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold air. Jasper turned and walked toward the tree line. They followed him into the dark. The forest received them without ceremony. The trees closed overhead, and the moonlight came through in pieces, brief illuminations between the dark. The flashlight making a narrow corridor of visibility through which Jasper moved steadily ahead. Nora watched him and thought about her mother moving through these same trees, and the thought of it was both comfort and grief, the two things arriving together the way they do when you are thinking clearly about someone you loved and lost. Eli walked beside her and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. The clearing opened before them without warning. A circular space in the forest moonlit the air inside it, feeling different from the forest air, older and more still, the air of a place that has been sealed against something and is only now opening. Jasper stopped at the clearing's edge and would not go further. At the center of the clearing stood a stone building, low, solid, built with the serious intention of something meant to outlast the person who built it. A wooden door warped and gray with age, marked with deep, deliberate scratches. Not animal. Something human, a message or a warning or both. Nora had grown up on this land. She had walked this forest as a girl. She had no memory of this building, which meant it had been built after she left, or she had been kept from it. She thought about her mother keeping things, about the press of her handwriting on the page. The door opened inward on a groan of long, stressed wood. The smell that came out was damp stone and rusted iron, and beneath those things something else, something mineral and faintly sweet. The smell Nora recognized from the road outcrops. Eli had asked about the smell of things from deep underground. She raised the flashlight. Crates. stacked floor to ceiling on the back wall and 3 deep along both sides. Wooden crates old, their slats still fitted tight, each one stenciled with letters she read in the way you read something you already know before you understand that you know it. Falton Energy Corp. Core Sample Series Restricted. Nora stood in the doorway of her mother's secret and thought about everything she had not known. She thought about May going to the county office and being turned away. She thought about May going to the newspaper and getting 4 paragraphs on page 9. She thought about a woman alone on a mountain with the truth and nowhere to put it except a stone building in the forest, and an old horse and a note written on the back of another note pressed hard enough into the paper to last through whatever came. Eli moved past her into the building and crouched beside the nearest crate and read the stenciling carefully. Then he looked up at her. "This is why she stayed," he said. Nora looked at him. "What do you mean?" "She stayed on this mountain her whole life," Eli said. "You said she never left. You said people asked her to sell and she refused. You said the county gave her trouble about boundaries and she wouldn't move." He put his hand flat on the lid of the crate. "She was guarding this." Nora stood in the doorway of the stone building and looked at her 13-year-old grandson, crouching in the flashlight beam next to 30 years of her mother's evidence, and felt something realign inside her, the way a joint realigns when it has been out of place long enough that the correction is both relief and pain at once. She had thought May was stubborn. She had thought May was attached to the land in the way of people who have never learned to want something different. She had thought, if she was being ruthlessly honest, that May was limited, that the mountain was a limitation, and her mother had simply never found the courage to leave it. She had been wrong. She had been wrong for 38 years. And then Jasper made a sound behind them, sharp and short and urgent, and Nora spun toward the clearing. At the edge of the tree line, in the place where the darkness was thickest, something stood, too still to be accidental. The stillness of something that has chosen its position and is waiting. Nora clicked the flashlight off. "Don't move," she said quietly. Her voice was level. She was a woman who had managed 30 years of classrooms, 30 years of adolescent crises and parental confrontations and administrative battles. And her voice knew how to be level even when the rest of her was not. The shape at the tree line waited. Then it withdrew into the forest carefully, the retreat of something that has been seen and does not want to be followed. Nora counted 60 seconds. Then she turned the flashlight back on low. She looked at Eli. He was steady, pale but steady, his jaw set, with the expression of a boy who has decided the situation requires him to be something larger than his fear. "We're taking 2 of these," she said, And then we're going back to the house. She wrapped 2 core samples in the canvas that had kept them for 30 years and tucked them under her arm. She took Eli's hand as they left the building, not because he needed it, but because she did, and he did not pull away. Jasper led them home through the dark. When the house appeared ahead of them, with its broken windows glowing faintly with the embers of their fire, Nora stopped for a moment in the yard and looked at it. Her mother's house. Her house now legally on paper in the formal language of county probate offices and title transfers. But something else, too. Something that the legality was only a pale copy of. She put more wood in the stove. She sat in the rocking chair and set the core samples on the table before her and looked at them by firelight. Her mother had pressed too hard on a pen, had carried a true thing up and down a mountain for 30 years with nowhere adequate to put it, had built a stone building in the forest and trusted a horse and written a note and waited with whatever a woman of that kind of faith waits with for someone to come back. Eli sat against the wall with his knees up and watched her face. "Are you okay?" he asked. Nora looked at him. "I'm angry," she said, "and I'm sad, and I'm glad I'm here." All at the same time, yes. Eli looked at the samples on the table. "What are we going to do?" "Tomorrow," Nora said. "We're going to find out exactly what those are and who knew it and what it cost her." She looked at the fire. "And then we're going to do something about it." She said it the way her mother would have said it, she realized. The flat certainty of a woman who has made a decision and does not require anyone's permission to act on it. The mountains settled around the house in the dark. The fire burned low and steady. Jasper stood at the edge of the yard in the cold, his breath making slow clouds ears forward, watching the tree line, still working, still keeping faith. Nora did not sleep well, but she slept, which surprised her. She had expected to lie awake, turning over everything the evening had delivered: the shape in the trees, the crates, the note, the 38 years of not knowing what her mother had been doing alone on this mountain. Instead, she drifted off in the rocking chair sometime after midnight, with her jacket around her shoulders and the fire burning low. And she slept the way you sleep when you have been carrying something heavy for a very long time and have finally set it down in a place that can hold it. She woke at first light to find Eli already awake, sitting at the table with the core samples in front of him, his field notebook open, making sketches of the stenciling and the coordinates stamped into the metal ends of the cylinders. He had found a tape measure somewhere in the kitchen drawers and had measured the samples and noted the dimensions. "You've been up," she said. She couldn't sleep. He did not look up from the notebook. "The coordinates on this one don't make sense if they're from where Falton Energy's public records say they were operating." Nora came fully awake. "How do you know where they were operating?" Eli looked up. "I looked it up on my phone this morning. Their annual reports from the late 80s are scanned online. I found 3 years' worth." He slid the phone across the table.
Their permitted operations in Harlan County were 12 miles north of here. These coordinates are here, under this land.
Nora looked at the phone, at the coordinates, at the boy who had been up since before dawn, doing geological research on a cell phone in a broken-down mountain house because he could not sleep and his mind needed something to do. He was so much like Daniel. She had to let the recognition pass through her rather than stopping it, because stopping it was not possible, and trying would only cost her something she needed. "You're going to be remarkable," she said. Eli looked embarrassed. "I just looked things up." "That is frequently all it takes," Nora said. They made tea from the tin she had found in the cabinet, thin and slightly metallic but hot, and ate crackers from the box in her bag. And then Nora wrapped the core sample in a dish towel and put it in her bag and left the second on the table. Some instinct about not putting everything in one place. The town of Calder's Bend was 6 miles down the mountain. A hardware store, a diner, a gas station, a post office, and at the far end, set behind 2 large oaks that had grown into something architectural in their own right, the county library. Nora pushed open the library door. The smell of old paper and warmed wood greeted her, the way this smell always greeted her, with the specific comfort of a place designed for learning, for the organized accumulation of what people have found important enough to write down. After 30 years in schools, she could not enter a library without feeling something ease in her shoulders. The woman behind the reference desk was perhaps 55, with silver-streaked hair worn simply, and the watchful eyes of someone who had spent decades assessing what people actually needed as opposed to what they said they were looking for. She looked up from a catalog she was annotating by hand. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Nora said. "I'm looking for someone who knows local geology, someone who might be able to identify a core sample and explain what it means." She paused. "And I'm looking for information about my mother, May Crawford. She owned land about 6 miles up the mountain road." The librarian, whose nameplate read W. Stroud, set down her pen and was still for a moment. "May Crawford," she said. Not a question. The name of someone she knew had known and had complicated feelings about knowing. "You knew her," Nora said. "She came in here many times over the years." Willa Stroud looked at Nora with the directness of a woman who has decided to stop equivocating. "She came to me for help more than once. I gave her what I could, but not what she really needed, which was someone willing to stand beside her and say out loud that she was right." She folded her hands on the counter. "I'm sorry for that. I should say that plainly." Nora looked at her for a moment. "You can help now," she said. "That's what matters." Willa picked up the phone. Orrin Packett arrived within the half hour, which meant he had not been far. He was 71, a tall man with the careful movements of someone who had spent a career being precise in his body, as well as his mind-hands that belonged equally to instruments and to stone. He walked in looking at the core sample before he looked at anyone in the room. He picked it up, turned it, held it toward the window. The movement was so automatic and practiced it was almost liturgical, the gesture of a man performing a rite he had performed 10,000 times and would perform 10,000 more. Then he set it down and looked at Nora. "Where did you find this?" "In a stone building in the forest behind my mother's property. There are crates of them, dozens at least, all marked Falton Energy Corp., all dated between 1987 and 1994. Oren's expression did not change dramatically. It changed the way a landscape changes when the light shifts, the same features suddenly differently understood. He led them to his table at the back of the library, a spread of geological survey maps, weighted at the corners, a magnifying glass pencils. He unrolled a different map, a geological survey of Harlan County, and asked for the coordinates from the sample. Eli read them off from his notebook. Oren's finger moved to the location and stopped. "That's your mother's property," he said. "Yes." Falton Energy had no permitted operations anywhere near this location. Not in 1987, not in any year of their operating history in this county. He looked up. "The band in this sample is spodumene, lithium-bearing spodumene. There is a substantial deposit under this ridge. Anyone who pulled these samples knew exactly what was down there." He paused. They mapped it. They documented it carefully. And then they stepped away and waited. "Waited for what?" Eli asked. "For lithium prices to make the fight worthwhile," Oren said. "Or for the land to become available in some way they could manage." He looked at Nora. "Your mother standing in the way was not what they had planned for." Nora was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about May at the county office, at the state office, at the Harlan newspaper. She was thinking about what her mother had been doing in all those years of phone calls, where they had talked about the garden and the weather and carefully avoided the real conversation. "She came to you," Nora said. Oren Packett did not look away. "In 1993, he said. She came in here with notes she had been keeping. She had heard the drilling at night. She had found disturbed ground on the east edge of her property. She had done her own sampling with a hand auger and knew enough to understand what she was looking at." A pause that carried its full weight. "I told her I couldn't confirm what she was describing. I had professional relationships with several of the energy companies operating in this region, and I was not willing to put those at risk." He looked at the core sample on the table. "I told her she had probably misidentified the source of the sound. I told her the ground disturbance was likely natural settling." He paused. "I knew those things might not be true." "But you said them anyway," Nora said. "Yes." The library held the silence for a moment. "You can help now," Nora said again, the same words she had said to Willa, because they were the words that were needed, and she intended to keep saying them to everyone who had failed her mother until all the debt was paid. "That's what I need from you." Oren nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "I can." 2 days later, a man named Ned Burris arrived at the library. He had come because Willa had made a phone call to a former colleague who had made a phone call that had eventually reached a 68-year-old retired drill technician living outside of Cumberland Gap, who had spent the better part of 2 decades working for energy companies in this region and had been carrying something heavy for most of that time. Ned Burris was a compact man, deliberate in his movements with the quality of someone who has worked in tight spaces for so long that economy of motion has become second nature. He sat across from Nora and Eli and set a cloth-covered ledger on the table between them without preamble. "This is the original," he said. "I kept it. I've kept it for 30 years, and I didn't entirely know what I was going to do with it, but I kept it." He opened it to a marked page and turned it so Nora could see. Columns of numbers coordinate dates, depth readings, sample numbers. The methodical record of an industrial operation. But in the left margin, in a handwriting different from the entries someone had added annotations, small pressed firmly into the paper. Nora leaned forward. "Samples outside, permitted boundary E Ridge, unauthorized," and further on, 3 pages later, the pen having gone over the letters twice. Crawford. "Mountain remembers." Nora put her finger on those words and held it there. She knew her mother's handwriting the way she knew her mother's voice. The pressure of it, the particular weight May put behind every letter, as though she did not trust the page to hold what she was trying to say. Her mother had found this ledger, or been shown it, and she had done what she always did. She had pressed her words into whatever surface was available. She had left a mark that would require destruction to remove. Mountain remembers. "How did she get access to this?" Nora asked. Ned was quiet for a moment. "I was 24 when I started at Falton," he said. 26 when I found the discrepancy. I ran a standard audit and the coordinates in the drilling records didn't match the permitted areas. I brought it to my supervisor and he told me I was misreading the maps. He paused. I knew I wasn't misreading the maps. I kept my copies of the relevant records. And when a woman came to the site gate one afternoon asking questions and declining to leave, I was the one they sent out to handle it. He looked at the ledger. I handled it by taking her to my truck and showing her the records. "And then?" Eli asked. His voice was careful, the voice of a boy who wants information and knows that how he asks determines what he gets. "And then I went back inside," Ned said. "I told myself I'd done something. I had done something, but not enough. She tried to use what I'd shown her, and nobody would hear it, and eventually she stopped being able to reach me. I moved, changed jobs twice. It was easier not to know what happened to her." He looked at Nora. "I'd heard her name come up again recently in connection with this case. I knew it was time." Nora looked at him with the frank assessment she had developed over 30 years of evaluating what people said against what they meant. "You can help now," she said, for the 3rd time. It was becoming a kind of incantation, a way of making right what had been wrong, one person at a time. Diana Voss's office was on the secondary street in Calder's Bend, in a white clapboard house with a sign that read, Voss Law, and beneath it, in smaller letters, no appointment necessary. Diana Voss was 47, compact and sharp-eyed, with the quality of someone who has chosen her battles carefully and wins the ones she chooses. She listened to Nora for 20 minutes without interrupting, which Nora recognized as a form of professional respect, the respect of someone who understands that the shape of a story matters and will not rush its telling. When Nora finished, Diana looked at the core sample, the photographs Eli had taken of the crates, the ledger pages Ned had provided. Orrin Packett is willing to certify his identification of the spodumene, she said. In writing, he's already preparing a statement. And Ned Burris will testify to the ledger and his direct knowledge of the operations. Yes. Diana tapped the core sample once with the pad of her index finger. This has teeth, she said. Significant teeth. The unauthorized drilling constitutes trespass compounded by fraud. The lithium deposit gives them a motive so clear and substantial that a jury will understand it immediately. She looked at Nora. I work on contingency for cases like this. If we prevail or reach a settlement, I take a percentage. If we don't, you owe me nothing. She slid a document across the desk. Nora picked it up and read it carefully, the way she read everything thoroughly and without rushing, because she had learned in 30 years of teaching that most trouble came from not reading things carefully enough. Then she signed it. The weeks that followed were the weeks of invisible machinery. Diana filed. Orrin wrote. Ned authenticated. Willa, who had been carrying the weight of her 1993 failure for long enough, produced from the library's archives the record of May Crawford's formal complaint to the County Environmental Office, filed October 7th, 1993, stamped, received, filed under unsubstantiated citizen concerns, where it had remained for 31 years. Nora and Eli stayed at the house on the mountain. She had not intended to stay. She had thought she would make the legal arrangements and return to Asheville for the start of the school year. But the school year had passed its start date while she was consulting with Diana and reviewing documents, and she had sent her department chair a message explaining a family emergency, and the department chair, who had known Nora for 12 years and understood that she did not use phrases like family emergency unless they were accurate, had arranged a substitute. The house drew her in the way places do when you have a history with them long enough to have forgotten most of it. She repaired things as she found them needing repair. A window she braced with lumber from the collapsed porch, a section of kitchen floor she reinforced with boards from the shed. She learned the house again, the way you relearn a language you were fluent in before you stopped speaking it with a recognition that precedes understanding. Eli was everywhere and useful. He had the particular quality of useful that is unself-conscious and instinctive. The usefulness of someone who has been managing a household alone for long enough that the skills were automatic. He cooked simple meals efficiently from whatever was available. He made repairs with tools he had found in the kitchen and the shed. He set up a study space at the kitchen table and worked through his school curriculum via the distance learning program. Diana's assistant had helped him enroll in completing the work with the focused dispatch of a boy who wanted it done so he could get back to more interesting things. The more interesting things were largely geological. Orrin had taken an interest in Eli that was clearly mutual and not merely courteous. He began stopping by on Saturday mornings with maps and samples and the vocabulary of his field. And Eli received all of it with the concentrated attention he gave to everything that genuinely mattered to him. Nora watched this from the kitchen window. Sometimes the old geologist and the 13-year-old boy on the porch with topographic maps spread between them, Eli asking questions in the specific voice he used when he was learning something he intended to keep. He had Daniel's mind, the directness of it, the way it moved toward the thing rather than around it. She let herself think about Daniel more now than she had in years. 11 years of silence, and she had managed the silence by not looking directly at it the way you manage a source of bright light, by keeping it in your peripheral vision. Now in this place where everything felt more direct and less managed, she thought about him plainly. He had been a difficult boy and then a difficult young man, full of a kind of banked intensity she had never entirely known how to meet. Thomas had understood him better. When Thomas died, the last thread connecting her to Daniel had nothing to hold the other end. She had waited for him to reach out. He had waited for her. And waiting had become the permanent condition. She thought about May, who had also waited. Who had waited on this mountain for 38 years for Nora to come back, and had waited without complaint and without withdrawing her love the way a woman who understands that mountains outlast urgency learns to wait. One evening, Eli said, "My dad talked about you sometimes." Nora looked at him across the kitchen table. "What did he say?" "He said you were the kind of person who expected things to be a certain way and had trouble when they weren't." Eli said it without cruelty, as an observation rather than a judgment. He said it wasn't your fault exactly. He said it was just how you were built. Nora was quiet for a moment. "He wasn't wrong," she said. Eli looked at her. "He also said you were the best teacher he ever had, before he stopped calling you that." Nora looked at the fire. "He told you that?" "A few times, usually when he was helping me with something school-related." Eli pulled his knees up. "He'd say my mother would know how to explain this, and then he'd try to explain it himself." Nora put another log in the stove and said nothing for a while, because there was nothing adequate to say, and silence was more honest. The SUV appeared on the mountain road on a Thursday morning. Nora saw it from the upper field where she had been clearing brush from the fence line. A slow and deliberate vehicle. Not a county vehicle, not a delivery truck. It stopped below the house, and a man got out. She came down from the field and stood in front of the house and waited. He was perhaps 50 broad-shouldered, wearing a good jacket, and the particular expression of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say and is confident in his preparation.
"Ms. Vance," he said. "Garrett Odom. I'm with Falton Energy's legal affairs team. I wonder if we could have a few minutes."
"We're having them now," Nora said. He made his offer with the smooth efficiency of someone who has made many such offers. The number was significant. It was the kind of number that would solve the immediate practical problems of her life for the foreseeable future, and several practical problems she hadn't gotten to yet. Nora looked at him while he spoke. She was a woman who had spent 30 years in classrooms, which meant she had spent 30 years assessing the space between what people said and what they meant. She was very good at it. "Did you know," she said when he finished, "about the drilling, about what they found under this land? Was that information you had?" Garrett Odom's response was a fraction of a second slower than it should have been if the answer were simply no. "The historical operations of the company before my tenure." "That's not what I asked," Nora said. He looked at her. He did not answer. "My mother spent 30 years telling the truth to people who chose not to hear it," Nora said. "Some of them chose not to hear it because it was inconvenient, and some of them because it was expensive, and some of them because she was a woman alone on a mountain, and it was easier to call her eccentric than to follow up on what she was saying." She kept her voice level. She was very good at keeping her voice level. "I'm not taking a settlement with a non-disclosure clause. I'm not doing this quietly." She didn't get to do any of it quietly. Garrett Odom looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the nod of a man who has delivered his message and knows the answer and will now go back and report it. He got in the SUV and left. Eli was in the doorway. "How long were you standing there?" Nora asked. "Long enough," Eli said. "Did he threaten you?" "Not precisely." She walked back toward the house. "He reminded me that courts are unpredictable and that settlements are tidy, which is a way of telling someone their situation is precarious without actually saying so." "Is our situation precarious?" Nora thought about Diana Voss and Orrin Packett and Ned Burris and Willa Stroud, all of them working with the focused intention of people who have something to make right. "No," she said, "I don't think it is." The night they burned the building was a Thursday, 3 weeks later. Nora woke to the smell of wrong smoke at 2 in the morning and was out of bed before she was fully conscious. Through the bedroom window, she could see the orange quality in the forest dark, not large, not catastrophic, but specific and deliberate. She woke Eli with a hand on his shoulder. He came awake the way he always came awake, completely and immediately. They ran through the forest with flashlights and found the stone building's doorframe burning the fire, set carefully to catch the dry wood while leaving the stone to limit its spread. 3 crates near the door had caught. Eli did not hesitate. He went through the smoke into the building and began dragging crates toward the back away from the burning section. Nora went in behind him and took the heavier ones. They worked without speaking the way people work together, when there is no time for anything except the work until the fire had nothing left to catch and burned itself out against the stone. They stood outside in the cold and smoke and breathed. Eli had burns on his right hand, small from the doorframe that he had not mentioned and would not mention unless someone noticed. Nora noticed. She took his hand carefully and looked at the burns and said, "We'll put something on those when we get back." He did not pull his hand away. "Someone knows where it is," he said. "Yes." "We should move everything." "Yes, first thing in the morning." They sat in front of the stone building for the rest of the night, taking turns at watch. Jasper stood at the clearing's edge and did not move his ears forward, his attention on the tree line. Doing what he had been doing for 2 years alone on this mountain, watching over what May had left in his care. The preliminary hearing was on a Wednesday in November. Falton Energy's attorney suggested, with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to these rooms, that May Crawford had exhibited a long-standing pattern of grievance, and that her claims had been reviewed at the time by county officials and found unsubstantiated. Diana Voss rose from the plaintiff's table. She was not a tall woman, and she did not use height when she could use precision instead.
Your Honor, she said, May Crawford filed a formal complaint with the Harlan County Environmental Office in October of 1993. That complaint was stamped received and placed in a file labeled Unsubstantiated Citizen Concerns, where it has remained unreviewed for 31 years. She paused with the deliberate timing of someone who understands exactly how long silence needs to last to do its work. Persistence is not paranoia. Living alone on a mountain is not instability. Knowing what is happening under your own land and refusing to stop saying so is not a pattern of grievance. It is integrity. And the reason it looks like a pattern is that she had to keep saying it because no one would hear it the first time, or the 20th, or the 50th.
The courtroom was quiet in the particular way of a room where something true has been said clearly. The judge ruled that the case would proceed. Nora sat in the front row of the gallery with Eli beside her and felt the ruling land with the weight of what it was. Not a victory, not yet, but the door finally opening on the thing her mother had spent 30 years trying to walk through. Eli's hand found hers in the gallery. He held it for a moment, her 13-year-old grandson, who had only known her for a few weeks, and then released it. That was enough. The night before the trial, Diana Voss drove up the mountain with the document in a clear plastic sleeve. Falton's attorneys filed this today, she said, setting it on the kitchen table. A mineral rights exploration agreement dated 1987, signed by May Ellen Crawford. Nora looked at the signature. It was cursive. Flowing practiced the letters connected with the easy fluency of someone who had spent a lifetime signing her name this way. Nora looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "My mother couldn't write cursive." Diana's eyes sharpened. "Tell me." May learned to read at 35 through an adult literacy program in Harlan. The program taught reading comprehension and basic printing. It did not teach cursive writing. My mother printed her entire life in block letters because that was what she learned, and she never had reason to change it. Nora looked at the signature through the plastic sleeve. This signature was written by someone who has been writing cursive since childhood. The letter forms are too automatic, too unselfconscious. My mother's block letters always had a slight deliberateness to them, the care of someone who learned later than most. She paused. I taught 9th grade English for 30 years. I know how people who learn to write at different ages hold a pen. This is not my mother's hand. Diana looked at her for a moment. Can you document it?
Eli was already at the shelf where Nora had stacked the probate documents. He came back with the folder and spread the contents on the table. The deed transferred the county tax records they had collected the signed complaint from Willa's archive. Every authentic signature in clear, deliberate block capitals. May E. Crawford. Diana photographed them all. "The county assessor's office will have more," Nora said. She paid her property taxes in person every year. "I know because she mentioned it on the phone. Once she said she liked to look the assessor in the eye when she paid." Something moved across Nora's face at the memory. She said it was the one time a year the county had to look at her like she existed. Diana was already typing a message. Willa Stroud, when reached, confirmed that the library archive held 7 additional documents bearing May Crawford's signature, all in the same block capitals. She photographed them and sent them. Diana lined the images up on the table beside the forged document. No expertise was required, no special knowledge. The difference was visible to anyone who looked. "They forged this recently," Diana said. "Paper and ink can be tested, and they filed it with the court, which means this isn't only fraud in the underlying case. This is obstruction. This is a criminal act committed in the course of litigation." She closed her briefcase with a decisive click. "We go to court tomorrow. We present this. And then we allow Falton Energy to calculate how much daylight they can afford." After Diana left, Nora stood on the repaired porch and looked at the mountain. Eli came and stood beside her. "You knew," he said, "about the signature right away." "Yes." "Because you're a teacher." "Because she was my mother," Nora said. "I knew her handwriting the way I know my own." She paused. 30 years of reading what she wrote to me year after year. The Christmas letters, the notes tucked into the preserves packages. All of it in those block capitals pressed hard so the words would stay. She was quiet for a moment. "I used to think she pressed so hard because she was somehow uncertain, as if she needed to force the pen to make the words permanent." "And now?" Eli asked. "Now I think she pressed hard because she had something to say, and she intended it to last," Nora said. "That's different." They went inside, and she did not sleep, and she did not try. The courtroom the next morning was the kind of room that has witnessed decades of human consequence and wears the evidence in its wood and its air. Nora sat at the plaintiff's table beside Diana. Eli was directly behind her. Orrin and Ned and Willa filled the gallery, having come without being asked, because the case had become something they needed to be present for. Diana presented the forgery evidence with the economy of a woman who knows that clarity is more powerful than drama. The forged signature. The authenticated signatures. The 31 years of block capitals in county records, tax receipts, library documents. Nora's sworn statement about her mother's handwriting history and the adult literacy program that had taught May to print, but not to join her letters. The forensic analysis ordered by the court came back in 5 days. The paper and ink dated to within the last 4 years. The handwriting was produced by a different individual than the authenticated May Crawford signatures,
with a confidence level the report listed as conclusive. Falton Energy filed for a continuance. The judge denied it. The settlement conference happened 10 days later in a room off the courthouse with a window looking into a courtyard where a persimmon tree held its fruit against the November sky, orange and stubborn and refusing to fall. Diana sat with Nora on one side. Falton's attorneys and a senior vice president of the parent company sat on the other. The vice president's presence meant someone above the people Nora had been dealing with had come down to assess the situation directly. That meant they were frightened. She was glad they were frightened. They negotiated for 2.5 hours. Nora spoke 3 times. The first time to confirm that no non-disclosure provision would be acceptable under any circumstances. The second time to say when Falton's attorney suggested that the long historical distance of the violations should reduce current liability. My mother was alive for 29 of those 31 years. She spent those years telling the truth to people who chose not to hear it. The passage of time is not a mitigation. It is a compounding of the original wrong. The third time was at the end when the vice president slid a number across the table and looked at her. Nora looked at the number. It was more than she had let herself anticipate. Enough to protect the land through the kind of conservation instruments that made what Falton had done legally impossible to repeat. Enough for Eli's education, real education, at a school that would meet his particular kind of mind. Enough to repair the house fully and maintain it. Enough for the things a woman her age needed when she had decided to stay somewhere. It did not compensate May Crawford for 31 years of being dismissed and called eccentric and filed under unsubstantiated citizen concerns. There was no number for that, but it was acknowledgement. Official, documented, legally binding acknowledgement that May Crawford had been right, and the people who dismissed her had been wrong. And that was the thing. That was the thing Nora had come here for. She nodded to Diana. Diana signed. The terms included Falton's acknowledgement of unauthorized drilling on the Crawford property between 1987 and 1994, acknowledgement of the removal of geological core samples without permission, restricted mineral development rights with strict surface and water source protections, the financial settlement, and no non-disclosure provision. May Crawford's name would remain attached to the true version of events. Outside the courthouse, Orrin and Ned and Willa were on the steps. They looked at Nora the way people look when a long overdue thing has finally arrived. Not celebratory exactly, something quieter. The deep relief of a debt being honored. Willa had tears on her face. She deserved to be here, she said. She is here, Nora said. She said it because it was true and because the words were exactly adequate. No more, no less. She shook Orrin's hand and Ned's hand, and they stood together in the November cold in front of the Harlan County Courthouse and said very little because the day had already said what needed saying. Eli stood at the bottom of the steps with his hands in his pockets and his face turned toward the ridge. Nora came down and stood beside him.
Done, he said. The legal part. Yes. What's next?
Nora looked at the ridge, the line of it against the sky she had looked at from this same general direction as a girl. Everything else, she said. The parts that take longer. The work on the house began the following week. Nora had grown up in a house maintained by a woman who fixed what broke and did not wait for permission to do so, and she had absorbed more of this than she had known. She worked alongside the crew that came from town, learning where she was useful and staying out of the way where she wasn't. The new roof went on first metal, built for the winters. Then the windows. Then the south wall's structural reinforcement. Eli worked alongside her. He had the instinctive usefulness she had come to depend on the ability to see what was needed and provide it before being asked. He was also developing under Orrin's Saturday instruction the beginnings of a real geological vocabulary, and he applied it to the mountain around them with the focus of a person who has found the thing their mind was designed for. Jasper got a proper barn at the end of November, built from good timber, with a south-facing orientation that caught the winter sun. He walked into it the first evening and stood in the clean straw with his ears relaxed and his eyes at half-mast, the expression of an old animal who has been released from a long and necessary duty and can finally rest. Nora stood at the barn door watching him. "He's done," Eli said beside her. "He's been waiting to be done," Nora said. "For 2 years he kept this place, kept the faith May put in him. Now someone's here and he can rest." Eli looked at the old horse in the clean straw. "Do you think she knew he'd last long enough?" "I think she believed the mountain would do what it needed to do," Nora said. "And she trusted Jasper to understand what that meant." In December, Orrin and Ned drove up with a bronze plaque and mounted it on the exterior wall of the stone building beside the repaired door. May Ellen Crawford, 1940 to 2022, Keeper of Proof. She told the truth before anyone profited from hearing it. Nora stood in front of it in the December cold, her breath making small clouds, the bare trees standing in their winter honesty around the clearing, everything visible that the summer hid. Eli stood beside her. She did not say anything for a long time. She was thinking about a woman who had stayed on this mountain for 60 years, who had grown a garden and kept a horse, and pressed too hard on her pen, and carried a true thing through 30 years of dismissal without putting it down. Who had built a stone building in the forest and trusted it to outlast her? Who had written a note and put it where someone who came back would find it? Who had understood with the particular intelligence of a person who has lived long enough on a mountain to know that mountains outlast everything, that the truth does not require a witness to remain true. It only requires a place to be kept. Nora put her hand on the plaque. The bronze was cold in the way of things built to last longer than the people who built them. "I should have come back sooner," she said. She said it to May, to the mountain, to the cold air that carried things. "You came when the letter came," Eli said. "And you came when I came. Maybe that's when you were supposed to come."
Nora looked at him. He had Daniel's eyes. He had Daniel's directness, the way of going straight to the thing without going around it. She was beginning to understand something that was entirely his own as well. A quality of patience beneath the directness, a willingness to wait for understanding to arrive rather than forcing it. She did not know yet where that came from. Perhaps it was new. Perhaps some qualities began with the person who had them. She took her hand off the plaque and turned back toward the house. January brought a journalist from the Knoxville paper, and from there, the story moved in the way stories move when they contain what this one contained. Nora gave one interview. She said her mother had been right, and the people who dismissed her had been wrong, and that the evidence had survived because May Crawford had understood something the institutions around her had not, which was that truth does not need an audience to remain true. It needs only a place to be kept, and someone eventually to come back for it. She said the land would stay in the family. She said her grandson would grow up on it. Willa organized the school visits. She had appointed herself to this role with the quiet certainty of a woman making good on a debt, and she carried the role with the dedication it deserved. She led groups of children up the mountain road in the winter and the early spring, telling them about May Crawford in plain language without sentimentality or excess. She did not say May had been eccentric or difficult, or a woman who didn't understand how things worked. She said May had understood how things worked better than anyone around her, and that was the heart of the matter. Eli went with Willa on these visits, standing to one side and answering questions when the children directed them at him. He had been there. He had seen the crates and pulled them from smoke. He was 13 and real and present, and that realness communicated something that adult explanation could not. A girl asked him once in February what it had been like in the stone building when they first found it. Eli described it carefully. The smell, the stenciling on the crates, the flashlight beam crossing the darkness. His grandmother's face when she read the company name. Was she scared? The girl asked. Eli thought about it honestly. She was something bigger than scared, he said. She looked like someone who had just understood something she was supposed to have understood a long time ago. And I think that's harder to feel than scared. Nora was in the doorway of the house 50 yards away, and she could not hear the words, but she watched Eli's face and understood what he was saying. The school year began for Nora in January, remotely her classroom and her students in Asheville receiving her through a laptop screen in May's kitchen. She had requested the arrangement and her principal had granted it, and she taught her 9th graders about reading and writing and the relationship between the two in the same kitchen where May had pressed too hard on a pen for 60 years. And she found that the location informed the teaching in ways she had not anticipated. She told them about her mother. Not the whole story, but the part about evidence and persistence, about what it means to keep saying a true thing when no one will confirm it. She told them that evidence is patient and that the truth does not require a witness to remain true. It was the best teaching she had done in years. By February, the house was what it had been trying to be all along,
a livable place, warm and sound. Its bones revealed and reinforced its original materials, honored rather than replaced. Nora had put May's rocking chair in the corner near the stove where it had always been, and she sat in it every evening after supper. And she thought about her mother sitting in this same chair, in this same corner, through 60 years of evenings. And the thinking of it was both grief and companionship. The two arriving together the way they do when someone is gone, but not gone. One evening in late February, Eli looked up from his geology homework. "Do you ever regret leaving?" he said. "When you were 20. Nora rocked slowly. The fire made its sounds. Outside, the wind was in the bare trees, the particular voice of the mountain in winter, direct and undecorated. "I regret what I thought I was leaving toward," she said. "I thought I was leaving toward something better than this, something bigger." She paused. "This was bigger. I just couldn't see it yet." Eli considered this. "What changed?" "Nothing changed," Nora said. "I changed. I became old enough to see what I'd been looking at." Eli wrote something in his field notebook which was never far from him. Then he looked up. "I'm glad you came back when you did," he said, "even if it took the letter." "I'm glad the letter came," Nora said. "And I'm glad you came." "Both of us at once," Eli said. "Yes," Nora said. "Both of you at once." She reached to the table beside the chair and picked up May's note, the original both sides. She read it the way you read something you know by heart, because knowing it by heart makes reading it more like listening. If you're reading this, you found your way back. Good. The mountain's been waiting for you. And on the back, if Jasper is still alive, follow him. He remembers what I couldn't tell you. Don't wait for morning. She folded it and held it in her lap. May had written it for whoever came. She had written it knowing that the whoever would be someone who had left and was coming back. Someone who needed to be told that the mountain had been waiting without impatience, without reproach. She had written it with the press of a woman who understood that forgiveness and invitation are sometimes the same gesture. Nora had come back. The mountain had been waiting. Spring came to the Appalachians with the thoroughness of a season that knows it has earned its position. The forest went from winter's honesty to the tentative green of March to the full and particular green of May, each tree its own shade of arrival. Jasper shed his winter coat in patches and stood in the sun outside his barn with the contentment of an old animal who has nothing left to prove. Orrin came on Saturdays and taught Eli to read the land. They went out together into the forest and the fields with maps and tools. And Eli came back in the evenings with his field notebook full and his boots muddy and a focused satisfaction in his face that was entirely his own. Willa brought a group up in May, the largest yet. Nora watched them come up the road from the garden she had started replanting in May's beds, the same varieties May had grown, where the seed packets and the garden journal she had found in the shed allowed her to identify them. Jessie, the girl in the red coat who had come twice, now looked at the garden on her way to the clearing and asked, "Did her mother grow the same things?" "Yes," Nora said. The girl looked at the garden for a moment with the thoughtful attention of a child who is making a connection she can feel the significance of, but not yet quite name. Then she went with the group up to the clearing. Nora watched them go and then turned back to the garden. She was planting the same things May had planted. She was living in the same house. She was sitting in the same chair in the evenings. She was pressing her own words into the paper when she wrote harder than she needed to. She had noticed, as if she didn't entirely trust the page to hold them unless she made them stay. She was becoming her mother in the ways that mattered. And instead of the thing she might once have felt about that, the complicated resistance of a woman who had spent 38 years defining herself against the life she had left, she felt only the clean and uncomplicated sense of something fitting into its right place. She went into the house and washed her hands at the kitchen pump and made 2 cups of coffee and brought them out to the new porch built from the right wood for the place, and sat in one of the 2 chairs she had put there and waited. Eli came around the side of the house from the direction of the clearing when the group had gone, his field notebook under his arm, mud on his boots, the look of someone who has done something satisfying. He sat in the second chair and took the coffee she offered without being asked, because they had been doing this long enough that some things did not require asking. They sat for a while in the quiet that had become their kind of conversation, the kind that did not need words to carry its full weight. Down in the valley, the town was visible, small and specific against the larger geography. Above them, the ridge held its line against the evening sky, that familiar dark line Nora had looked at as a girl, without knowing she would be sitting here at 58, looking at it again. "Did she know it would be you?" Eli asked. Not May and Nora this time. May and both of them. Nora thought about the note, about the building, about Jasper living 2 years on a mountain alone because May had trusted him with something and he had not put it down. She knew the mountain would hold it, Nora said. She knew the truth was stronger than the people pushing against it. She left the rest to whoever came back. Eli turned the small stone he had picked up somewhere in the clearing over in his fingers, reading it the way Orrin had taught him. "We came back," he said. "We did." She would have liked that it was us. Nora looked at the ridge. "Yes," she said. She would have liked that exactly. Jasper was in his barn ears, relaxed eyes at half-mast, resting in the particular way of an animal that has fulfilled its purpose and been released from it. The barn door stood open to the evening air, and the last light of May came through it in a warm bar across the straw. Down in the valley, a light came on in the town, the first of the evening lights, and then another, each one a small claim against the approaching dark.
The mountain held them in the unremarkable way of things that have always known their own nature. Steady, patient keeping what it kept releasing what was ready to be released. Nora was 58 years old, and her knees hurt when the weather changed, and she had 30 years of other people's classrooms in her body, and 1 year of her own mountain beginning, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She picked up her coffee. The mountain air moved through the trees and carried with it the smell of the garden and the new wood of the repaired house, and the old stone of the building in the clearing, and everything that had been kept there, and was kept no longer, everything that had been waiting to be found, and had been found, and was now free to be what it always was. Truth finally in the open. A woman's life finally heard. A mountain keeping its own.